Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Alex Paul from InvestorStream, and I'll be your host today. Today, we have ADX Energy Executive Chairman Ian Tchacos, who will be providing an update on the company's Vienna Basin green hydrogen project and the broader investment attractions of hydrogen. Following the presentation, Ian will be available to address any questions you may have. We'll attempt to get through as many questions as time permits. Please feel free to send in your questions via the chat platform, in the question pane in the GoToWebinar control panel, or simply email them to me at alex@investorstream.com.au. You can also download a copy of the presentation by navigating to the handouts pane in the control panel. I understand the presentation has also been lodged on the ASX as well. Finally, a copy of the webinar will also be available on ADX's website and social media platforms later today. But for now, I'd like to throw it over to Ian to kick things off for us. Ian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alex. And thank you everyone for joining us today. First thing I wanted to say was, look, this webinar is basically focused on our Vienna Basin hydrogen project. It's, I guess, front runner in terms of the potential commercialization of our renewable strategy, which sits across our oil and gas strategy. And I guess from a strategic perspective, ADX does not see that the investment in renewables in any way diminishes our aspirations in oil and gas. We think in Austria, the two investments actually sit very well together. And in fact, the oil and gas assets that we have actually enable our green aspirations. So this is not a case of greenwashing. This is a case of basically adding life to our assets and creating new business pathways. Alex, if you go to the next slide, please. So we've got a couple of disclaimer notices. You can read those at your leisure. So look, as I mentioned earlier, we are very much a niche player in Europe. We've got positions in Austria, Romania, and Italy. We currently produce safe, long life, low emissions oil and gas, which is really important in Austria, and that provides cash flow to also pursue our green aspirations. So the combination of our existing assets, our people, and our skills enable us to get into what we believe are going to be some really important low carbon opportunities, including the Vienna Basin hydrogen project and a novel geothermal pilot project that we're embarking on with Siemens. So we're really focused on becoming a green hydrogen supplier in the Vienna Basin. We think it's an ideal place to do it, but we're also looking at other potential technologies. And we think by investing our cash flows into long-term low carbon energy assets, we're enhancing the value of both asset classes. Thanks, Alex. So where do we see ourselves in energy markets? As I mentioned earlier, we're not exiting oil and gas. In fact, our ability to be able to procure exploration license and oil and gas licenses has actually enabled us to pursue also our green aspirations. So what we are seeing is oil and gas supply constraints are becoming more and more constrained. The majors are basically not going forward with any large projects. We also see where we operate in Europe that low emissions hydrocarbons will have a distinct advantage over imported hydrocarbons. So what we expect to see over time is hydrocarbons that are responsibly produced will actually attract a premium value. We're lucky to be in a very supportive jurisdiction in Austria. At the same time that they awarded our exploration acreage in January last year, they also announced they'd be increasing the level of renewables by 6-fold by 2030. So the Austrian government believes in the immediate term, oil and gas is required, but in the longer term, to enable a transition, you need a greater accessibility to renewable energy. And it's not just oil and gas price that's important, because when you look at projects, it's also important to look at carbon price. So what you can see on that graph is actually the share price of Verbund. If you don't know them, they're one of Europe's biggest green energy producers. They're actually Austrian, and the majority, 80% of their energy comes from geothermal. So what you can see is as the cost of carbon has gone up, so has their share price. And what's interesting about them, even though they're 80% renewables, they're actually buying up gas pipeline systems, because they understand that to be able to deliver green energy in a hydrogen economy, pipelines are going to be really important. So we believe the transition to green energy is just good business. It means that we can redeploy our assets and extend their life. In the case of our Vienna Basin fields, this will give another, if you like, a tranche of revenue for those fields. It will also extend their life, and there'll also be cost sharing. So what you end up doing with an oil and gas field is extending its life, extending the period of time before abandonment, and adding short-term value. So underground reservoirs, can be used for a range of different things for green energy solutions. We're concentrating on hydrogen storage and geothermal now, but we see also CO2 storage and underground methanization, other potential technologies that we would get into in the right circumstances. And I say circumstances because circumstances are important. It's not in every country, in every jurisdiction, that you're going to have the right geology, the right infrastructure, and the right government support. So all these things don't work everywhere, but where they do work, they can be very profitable. And so, geography and geology is very important. And the reason we're embarking on this project is not just because we like the idea of green hydrogen. We do. It's because we've got the right reservoir characteristics, we've got the proximity to green energy, and the availability of export infrastructure. And of course, political and financial support is also very, very important, and that's a big enabler in both Austria and the EU. So look, I guess the proposition to investors is that oil and gas companies that can transition effectively can actually be the solution, not the problem. And that's what we hope to prove over the coming months and years. Thanks. This is just an overview of our asset base in Austria. You can see we hold the Vienna Basin fields off to the right, just 70 kilometers from Vienna. And then we hold 2 exploration licenses, which are proximal to infrastructure. And you'll hear more about that shortly, because we'll be drilling a well in a number of weeks in those licenses. So what we've been able to do is actually break into a 75-year duopoly. We're basically only the third company to actually hold production in Austria, and only the second exploration operator. But what's really important is not just the oil and gas infrastructure, it's also the green infrastructure that's available to us. And also the capability and having of our people and having boots on the ground to be able to expand our opportunities. Next, please. So just a quick overview of our Vienna Basin fields. We purchased those in December 2019. They're long life, low decline assets. With improved oil price in recent times, we're generating about 800,000 per month in sales revenue. Again, it's low emission production. Importantly, we also hold about 14 hectares of land, and that land can be utilised, for green energy production, and it makes it a lot easier for us. Importantly, these are multi-layered reservoirs. So these reservoirs have been in production for quite some time. Some of those shallow gas reservoirs have been depleted. We know they've held methane for a long time, and now they can be exploited for storing hydrogen. And we've got excellent infrastructure. We're connected to the oil refinery in Vienna, the Schwat refinery. We're also connected to the local and regional gas systems, which is really important because now in Europe, in most places in Europe, and especially in Austria, you can now put 10% by volume injected into the methane system. That's there by law. It has been since July 1, and most jurisdictions are looking to go to 30%. So unlike in many places in the world, you may be able to create hydrogen, but it's very difficult to get it to market. In this case, we're already connected to how we're going to get it to market. What's also important, I'll point out again, is that we recently had a substantial reserves upgrade for our fields, and you can go and have a look at an announcement we made in earlier in November about basically a twofold increase in our oil reserves. But the important thing is oil will keep producing, it'll keep generating cash flow, and then we hope to continually build our hydrogen position, so that'll overtake, if you like, the oil position. But you can see in some of those photographs where you've got a rig there in that bottom right-hand corner, and then the plethora of wind power generation behind us. Next, please. Next, please, Alex. Thank you. Look, this is just a schematic showing you how you get from basically wind power through to hydrogen generation by electrolysis, then storage, and then how that hydrogen can be either injected directly into the export pipeline system, or it could also be, if you like, stored on site and transported for transportation fuel. Initially, we're going to start with the simplest and cheapest commercialization pathway, which will be simply generating the hydrogen. It'll require an interconnector to be built from a nearby wind farm. We generate the hydrogen, we'll store it in our reservoirs. Of course, because green power, or particularly wind, is not generated every day at the same levels, then what we're doing is taking extra capacity, which is cheap power, and turning it into hydrogen, storing it in our reservoirs, and then actually blending it with the gas stream that we're already putting into those pipelines. So we can effectively control the system. We're simply blending our hydrogen with our gas that we're currently putting into the local system. Next, thanks. Now, this is a really busy slide, but for those of you who like numbers, it's really an explanation of why you would go to underground storage. We know in Australia that the popular forms of storage are basically battery storage, and more recently we have the snowy hydro, and that's pumped hydro storage. So that's pretty commonplace, and it's pumped hydro is especially commonplace in Austria. But the problem with pumped hydro is it takes a lot of space. Austrians love walking through their mountains. They don't like looking at dams in their mountains. And also, battery storage is much more expensive. It's really designed for instantaneous power. It's not designed for long-term, if you like, power delivery. So hydrogen is a very different concept. It's much cheaper. It's out of sight. And also is a much larger source of storage. So what it enables you to do is take if you like, a fluctuating power source, convert it to hydrogen, store it, and then deliver it in a steady state profile to your markets. And that's obviously really important, particularly if you're going into a gas network where you're only allowed to put in 10% by volume. So because we've got multiple reservoirs, it's also a scalable solution. And because those reservoirs are proven to flow at high rates, you can also, if you need to supply hydrogen quickly, you can also. But what's really important is our reservoirs are really well suited in terms of depth for the output from an electrolyzer, and we can very simply inject hydrogen into our reservoirs. We've already got all the infrastructure to then be able to deliver it from our reservoirs into the existing pipeline system. Next, please. So I think the other important thing to note is that, we're only 70 kilometers from Vienna, and we can basically become the battery for Vienna. Next, please, Alex. So basically, I talked about our corporate strategy, and really what we're looking to do here is basically progress with our renewable asset opportunity, in this case hydrogen, as quickly as we can to FID, and start to transform the company's asset base. The transformation is really just to add value. It's not because we don't believe that our oil and gas assets have value, because we believe they do, but simply said, it's just another string to our bow. Obviously, we want to continue to develop important relationships, such as the one we have with Windcraft, and also the one we have Siemens, and they're big enablers for our, if you like, low carbon transformation. We want to actually establish renewable subsidiaries, or a subsidiary, and that will enable us to have an arm's length relationship to if you like, the low carbon assets. So basically, our assets and our people in ADX Vienna can supply, if you like, pieces of our asset base that are relevant for low carbon, and, if you like, services to pursue those projects, but they will all be commercially independent. So once that's set up, it then enables us really to say that the green subsidiary is basically a low carbon entity that can be totally ESG focused, and then it makes it much easier for us to access ESG focused capital. So our goal is to be a first mover in terms of green hydrogen supply in the Vienna Basin. The Austrians have already said they want Vienna to be a hydrogen hub. So we see, a big opportunity there for us. But obviously, we need to start small, and we're going to scale our hydrogen project in line with increased availability of power, and also our ability to capture green hydrogen markets. Next, please. So this is just showing sort of the commercial structure that I briefly outlined. Basically, you've got ADX Energy at the top, the formation of a green subsidiary, and from that green subsidiary, we can have what we call there a green hydrogen SPV, which would hold, if you like, the Vienna Basin assets. So what you have is a series of assets that need to be funded in terms of electrolyzers, compression equipment, and some of those assets will actually be provided by third parties, such as an interconnector. But then ADX Vienna will also supply very important assets. For instance, the underground reservoirs that are very important for storage. We've already got pipelines and metering in place, and obviously the land is going to be very important. So we're going to have to set up commercial structures for ADX Vienna to supply those at arm's length to the green hydrogen subsidiary. So if you're an investor in the green hydrogen, you know that you've got certainty of access to those assets which are critical to your business. Next, please. Okay, so look, in that recent letter, I wanted to painstakingly make it obvious that there are a number of reasons that we're progressing with this project, and the primarily is because everything we need to immediately pursue this project is already there, or basically off-the-shelf technology. The beauty of our relationship that we're developing with Windcraft Siemensfeld is obviously the availability of green power. Fortunately, in Austria, we've also got abundance of water and pure, clean water. and really they're the two key ingredients to create hydrogen. But if you don't have a place to store the hydrogen, hydrogen is really expensive. If you had to store hydrogen in a surface facility, it would make it almost cost very difficult in terms of cost to actually undertake this project. So it's actually the ability to store the hydrogen that enables you to take green power and basically then utilize the whole the hydrogen that's produced as and when you need it. And because you can store large quantities, then you can then go out and negotiate long-term contracts for things other than just supply to the local network. But we are blessed by the fact that in the past, these fields were producing into the local gas network for a long period of time. In fact, we supply the entire demand for the local network in the Zisterdorf area where we operate. But there's also, if you like, a higher pressure network that any surplus hydrogen could be put into. And we also own a compressor station that could also be utilized to compress hydrogen and gas to get into that system. And then, of course, in the longer term, the proximity to the city of Vienna, where we're already connected by pipeline, and we expect more pipelines to be built that can take, if you like, higher concentrations of hydrogen. That'll be a really valuable source of market development for us. Next, please. So what I've shown here is actually an almost analogous project to the one that we're seeking to move forward with. This is a wind to gas facility for green hydrogen generation. In this case, what they're utilizing is because they don't have any storage, they're basically utilizing the hydrogen to be used for local demand for transportation, which is a very big growing area for hydrogen. And there's also a battery storage system which allows them to also put, if you like, electricity in the grid if they end up with surplus power. But it also means by having a battery system, when they don't have wind, then they can also continue to supply power to their hydrogen electrolyzer. So this is all part of Germany's national hydrogen strategy, where they plan to build about 5 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity by 2030. And the reason for this is they're targeting, decarbonisation areas which are very difficult to achieve without hydrogen, and that's sort of big trucks, trains, and the industrial sectors such as steel manufacture and also cement. But also what we will see is hydrogen being deployed more and more to displace methane in gas-fired power. Because if you think about it, you can actually mix hydrogen with your methane, put it straight into a turbine. And the advantage is obviously you're progressively greening up your power output, but also in Europe, because there's an ever-escalating cost of carbon, then you're also reducing the number of carbon credits that are required because you're displacing methane with hydrogen. Next, please. Okay, again, for those of you who like facts and figures, basically what we're looking for in phase one of our project is to, as we mentioned earlier, what we're trying to do is really match the capacity of an electrolyzer with the expected availability that we're going to get from our first local wind farm. And then we plan to increase that because we know there are a lot of wind farms around us, and we know nearly all the wind farms are not able to produce power to capacity, and a lot of that power is wasted. So if we can build, if you like, a network which can provide the ability for those wind farms to take that surplus capacity and deliver it to us, then the wind farm operator is getting some value for power they would otherwise just have to shed. And also, I guess they're making better use of their assets and we're making better use of ours. So basically, we'll start with 2.5 megawatts. That'll produce about, at full capacity, about 1,000 kilograms a day. More likely, we're going to start around 30% capacity and then build up to 50. But then what will happen is that hydrogen will be stored in our fields, initially one of our reservoirs, and then what we'll be able to do is then deliver that hydrogen in combination with our gas stream into the local pipeline network. So the rough costs of this project, and this is very indicative costing, is about €1 million for an interconnector, and then about another €4 million for the electrolyzer and the balance of plant. And that really involves some refurbishment of our existing equipment. That may go up somewhat if we need to drill another well. Those costs on the basis we can use an existing well and work it over. But a project like this, we'd expect about 2 years to start up from FID. The actual installation of the electrolyzer is not that time consuming. It's probably going to be more the interconnector. The electrolyzer would take about 6 months to install. Now, what I've tried to do there is just show you a bit of a revenue split based on $5 a kilogram hydrogen sales and the power arrangements between curtailed power and stable power. Obviously, the curtailed power, we're getting at a deep discount, but we're also looking for stable power to basically increase the amount of capacity. So when you look at that graph, basically 30% is the kind of revenue component in terms of financing, net cash flow, and also the value to our reservoirs. And that's important because actually what we're actually doing is getting value for an existing asset. So we've discounted that value. That's about 9% of the revenue stream to be able to get the project up and running. But as we get higher efficiencies, we expect to get much more value out of our reservoir, and we'll also see a greater revenue, net cash flow split. But what we want to do initially is get ourselves in the game and then continue to build. Next, please. Okay. So what are the next steps? Slide 17. All right. Slide 17, please.
Apologies, Ian. Just give me 1 second, sorry.
No worries. I'll take time to have a coffee. Okay, so there's a lot to do. We're not there yet. As I mentioned earlier, I think a key part of any green hydrogen ambition, and the big shortage is really access to green power. So the memorandum of agreement that we announced recently with Windcraft Simonfeld is really important. It's not just important in terms of supply of power, which is critical for the project, but also we expect them, from our discussion to date, that they will actually build the interconnector as their contribution to, if you like, earn an interest in the project, and that's really important because we see green power as really the key to building on this project. As I mentioned earlier, we're blessed by our existing connections to the network and our ability to immediately be able to put hydrogen into that network. but we've got work to do with the local utility because we'll be the first people putting hydrogen into that local network. We also believe this is a great project for the Zisterdorf community, who, thanks to us, will start to green their community. And also in the longer term, we expect to actually develop, if you like, a hydrogen ecosystem. And what we mean by that is a number of other industries, such as refueling stations for hydrogen, utilization for hydrogen for other new industries, and existing industries. And we know there are industries out there already that have got quite high cost of fuel, and obviously utilizing green hydrogen would significantly reduce their fuel cost, and also the amount of money they're spending on carbon credits. So once we've really finalised our work with Windcraft and we understand our sales profile much better, then we'll be able to finalise our basis of design. And we see a number of projects, such as the project I showed in Germany, which are very good, if you like, analogies to what we want to do. We know that that's off-the-shelf technology, so that's something we can progress very quickly. And what we'd like to do is develop a project budget and economics for the pilot project, but also be able to show investors what the scaled-up project would look like. Now, we've already commenced discussions with the local authorities, the Austrian authorities in terms of the mining authority. Hydrogen is already being injected kind of experimentally by some companies, not commercially, into existing reservoirs. So, this is not rocket science. This is just a continuation of the work that other people are already doing. But we hope to be the first commercial project. But importantly, the Austrian government knows what we want to do and they're supportive of it. And so we'll then, obviously, once this project's up and running or progressing, then we see lots of opportunities for further hydrogen sales, and also continue to build our green power input program. So parallel to that, we mentioned that we're pursuing the setup of a separate corporate structure. So that'll require a new company that'll basically house our green assets, but we'll also have to set up the necessary intercompany agreements for the green project developments. And that enables us to establish our ESG accreditation for debt and equity funding, and that's really going to be important. We're going to progress with subsidies and finance, but it's important to get our basis of design finalised before we do that. And there are a number, if you like, of credits that you can get, for voluntary emissions reduction, and basically so you can benefit from the carbon that you're not using in the atmosphere. So what we have is subsidy applications will be ongoing, and then what we hope before FID of the hydrogen project, that we would also be looking to be able to source equity and project funding within that green subsidiary. So really, we see this as the hydrogen project as a great pathway to the hydrogen megatrend, and I say that because there are very large subsidies in Europe, around 750 billion of subsidies and finance going into green technology. Austria is increasing their level of renewables by a factor of 6. You've got companies like Bosch wanting to spend about 800 million to develop infrastructure for hydrogen vehicles. And we've already seen in Sweden a pilot plant for green steel pilot production. What's interesting about that project is they need 500 megawatts of electrolyzer capacity, which is a very large amount of power. Initially, they can't do it with green hydrogen. They have to do it with blue hydrogen, which means that that's hydrogen produced from hydrocarbons, and then the carbon is stored. but then eventually what they want to do is transition to green hydrogen, because green hydrogen is the gold standard, and that's where everyone wants to get to, and that's why we've opted for green hydrogen in the Vienna Basin. Next, please, Alex. Okay, so thank you very much for your attendance. As Alex mentioned, I'm happy to stick around to answer some questions. If there are any questions you think of later on, feel free to send emails to either myself or Paul. Paul's in Vienna, currently asleep, so he won't answer them for a while. But yeah, we're happy to take any questions and send them through to those email addresses. And thank you for your participation.
Thanks, Ian. We have had a couple of questions come through. So the first question that comes through, you mentioned the project's proximity to infrastructure. In terms of construction and, broadly speaking, CapEx, what's required on the ground to advance the project?
Yeah, look, the main thing, really, the main new infrastructure that's required is the installation of the electrolyzer and the interconnector. The electrolyzer is probably, much more trivial than the interconnector, because the interconnector needs to be buried, so you have to go through a process the same way as a pipeline to be able to get the local approvals. But as you can see from the photos, there are a lot of wind power generators around, so that takes time, but it's a well-proven process. And unlike some places on the planet, actually the area of Sisterdorf is very supportive of wind power. So really we don't see any big issues there. But that'll be about a 7-kilometre interconnector to Windkraft Simonsfeld's wind power generation facility.
So you've mentioned it throughout the presentation, but I guess could you just expand on the market opportunities for green hydrogen in Europe and globally? You mentioned that green hydrogen was the one that that is getting all the interest down the track. Can you just expand on the market opportunities available for you?
Yeah, look, I'm probably best placed to really comment on Europe, because that's where our focus is. But I guess the worldwide, the predictions in 30 years will have about 500 million tonnes per annum of green power. And I think in Europe, we know in Germany by 2030, which is a bit closer than 30 years, they're planning to install about 5 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity, and in the EU, about 40 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity. Our ambition's about 50 megawatts, so would be, a very, very substantial project for us. So you can see, we're already a drop in the ocean. But importantly, there's a lot of support for this. If you, I guess the reason being is, if you produce 150 ton, sorry, 1,300 tons of hydrogen, and this is a truck facility the Germans are building. The reason they're building the size of that facility is because that's about the demand they see for trucks in that particular area, but then that displaces about 13,500 tons of CO2. So there's a very direct relationship of 10 to 1 of hydrogen to CO2 displacement. So the Europeans are very, very keen on this. They see, I mean, there's some things that you can't do with, batteries. I mean, the industrial side and the, large trucks, etc., are really not achievable with batteries. So to really get that transformation, you're going to need some other fuel, and hydrogen is probably the best that's available at the moment.
And is there a specific sector or industry that you plan on targeting, such as hydrogen-powered vehicles, power generation, etc.?
Yeah, look, as I've sort of mentioned, I think everywhere is a bit different. I think for the scale of our project, we see very good opportunities purely initially just going into the local gas network, because it just means that it's a bit like the bad old days when people told you, you should put methanol into your fuel tank, and you're making the world greener. Well, it's a little bit like blue hydrogen. Sometimes it takes more energy to create something than it does than the energy you actually create. The advantage of green hydrogen is you put 10% into the network, you're actually displacing 10% hydrocarbons out of the network. So that can just go into basically all the existing systems that are currently being utilised. I think the next step up from that is both power generation and mobility solutions like trucks and buses, etc. So we know in Austria they're already pushing really hard on that. But so that will then involve us being able to distribute hydrogen, and you can distribute hydrogen through high pressure vehicles where they basically store hydrogen at high pressure and it's trailer mounted, or you can actually liquefy it, so you can actually move hydrogen around like that and displace, if you like, the usual diesel in larger vehicles. But also, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of gas power generation around, and that gas power generation could almost immediately take low levels of hydrogen. The advantage of that right now is it's not just, if you like, hydrogen and carbon that's expensive, but gas is extremely expensive in Europe. So if you like, it just makes hydrogen an even better option, because you're displacing gas that's already very expensive, and you're also benefiting because in Europe, any gas you burn, you're going to have to pay carbon credits for. So that's where we see the immediate growth opportunities for us. Now, if someone comes along and builds a steel plant, that we'll obviously look at that, or we've seen some, if you like, incineration plants that are currently using propane. That again, that'd be a nice little market for us.
And just on the storage of hydrogen, what are the challenges of storing such a small molecule like hydrogen versus petroleum gas in the depleted reservoirs?
Yeah, look, as I mentioned earlier, it's not new. It's something that's already been done. So the main challenges are actually getting it into the reservoir, because there are some metallurgical, if you like, limits of plain carbon steel. So that's the work that we'd have to do in terms of renewing some of that infrastructure within our if you like, our system. But already, I mean, as the reason that people are starting with 10% hydrogen is because if you mix hydrogen with methane, it's not really a problem for metallurgy. And what's actually happening in Europe now is they're looking at the metallurgy of all the pipelines, their age, etc. And the plan is to go to about 30%, if you like, hydrogen. But I mean, obviously, hydrogen is a lot lighter than methane. One of the, if you like, the difficulties that we will get. I mean, we know what's come out of those reservoirs, because methane was sitting there for 30 million years, and then it was produced out of the reservoir. So we know what impurities, etc., are in those reservoirs, and we don't see any issues there. But what will happen is, because there was methane in those reservoirs, when you inject hydrogen into them, you will get some methane back out. But that's not really a problem for us, because we're going to be putting the hydrogen into the methane network anyway. So if there's small amounts of methane entrained, that's not going to be a problem. But if we wanted to then further down the tracks, say go to markets that wanted pure hydrogen, then we could install further processing, which is demethanization, and basically you can then separate out the methane, the low levels of methane that are entrained in the production stream. But right now we can deliver hydrogen that may have a little bit of methane in it to the gas system. If we have, say, someone that wants pure hydrogen immediately, then what we can do is put a small amount of storage, surface storage, and be able to deliver that by, truck-mounted hydrogen trailers to specific markets that may want hydrogen for their refueling or displacement of other, if you like, of methane that's not currently connected to the network.
You mentioned the Austrian government appear to be quite favourable towards the green hydrogen development. How is your relationship with them? And can you just expand on, maybe some conversations that you have with them and what they've what their public view has been on green hydrogen development?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, look, I think we've got a very good relationship with the government generally. Look, we've been very well supported, and look, the big reason for it is that the majority of the people on the ground are people that were previously employed by the second biggest oil and gas company in Austria, so they know the people, and we were able to secure acreage in Austria in record time. We're only the only party in 75 years to actually get access to production assets, and that's really only because the CEO of RAG came to us at the meeting at the Mining Authority and said, look, there's nothing to see here. We're going to support these guys, and RAG do in some areas, but also the important thing is that we've got very experienced people on the ground. So that's kind of the first step. But obviously, we don't want to be going out and making ASX announcements without the Austrian government all of a sudden saying, oh, geez, these guys are in the hydrogen business. So before we made any announcements about our hydrogen ambitions, we actually talked to the regulator, explained to them what we were planning to do, and they're very supportive of it. So that's true of hydrogen. It's also true of our aspirations for geothermal as well. But also, something quite unique about our fields, because they've been around for 50 years, we actually own the reservoirs. It's a bit like the situation in the US, where the people that have the surface rights also have the underground rights. So in a way, we're much better positioned to determine our future because we have rights to those reservoirs, rather than the government, say in Upper Austria. It's actually the government that has the rights, and obviously we have to pay royalties for utilisation of those reservoirs.
So Europe's obviously emerged as a clear leader in terms of government policy supporting the sector. I understand the EU is planning to invest hundreds of billions of dollars into hydrogen production and infrastructure. How does ADX benefit from this supportive regulatory environment in Europe?
Well, obviously, there's two things. We need funding. Obviously, it'd be nice to get subsidies. Subsidies are good in the sense that they provide, if you like, very low cost or in sometimes free capital, but they also come with a substantial process. So there's advantages and also disadvantages. But also, I mean, one of the reasons we started thinking about this project actually started early in 2020, when our bank came to us and said, look, we've got these green energy bonds and we just don't have enough projects to deploy them. Have you guys got any green energy projects that that we could help you with? And the best we could come up with at the time was a couple of battery-operated vehicles in the field. So, I mean, what we saw was a proliferation of, if you like, of very attractive finance for green projects. But I mean, to give you an example, I mean, the EU is talking about €750 billion worth of funding for green projects, especially hydrogen. Just in the last month, there's been about 1.25 billion of subsidies to 7 hydrogen projects. So look, I mean, what obviously what we need to do once we know exactly what we're going to build, then we can start going to a lot of the agencies that are, if you like, providing these subsidies. And there's subsidies like that in Australia as well. I mean, there's quite a nice little hydrogen generation park in South Australia, where they actually produce hydrogen and then deliver it to local industry. So it's happening everywhere. It's just in Europe, it's much bigger numbers, and they're pressing a lot harder, to make things happen quickly. And people are more motivated because the cost of carbon is going through the roof. Right now, the cost of carbon is about $60 a tonne. The European Bank of Redevelopment estimates by 2030 it'll be $300 a tonne. So that's a very, very big disincentive for people to be using hydrocarbons.
How do you plan to undertake the development of the hydrogen project alongside the growth and development of your conventional hydrocarbon assets?
Yeah, look, I mean, we see this as a pretty seamless process. I mean, obviously, we will have to scale up in relation to our project in the Vienna Basin. But look, that's going to be a good thing. It'll be more local activity. It'll also mean that the people that we do have, we can deploy across 2 assets rather than 1. But obviously, operationally, it's not going to be that difficult. But it's more, if you like, that we're going to have to basically build a company that sits alongside ADX, the oil and gas company. Because what we're hoping for with the work that we're doing in Upper Austria is that ADX will get to a point in terms of oil and gas that it's self-funding. We produce enough oil and gas that we can reinvest it and produce more oil and gas. But then alongside that, we can have if you like, a green energy company, which will start with hydrogen. Then we see a lot of legs in the geothermal space, particularly in Upper Austria and also some of the other countries around us there. So what we'd like to do is basically get to a point where we've got if you like, a separate company that houses those assets and effectively a new management team that will run those assets once they reach, if you like, FID status. Before that happens, we're in a very fortunate situation that we can fund, if you like, the development of these assets at the early stages. But already, we've brought people on board as consultants doing commercial work, both in Australia and in Austria. We've brought on, people who've had, development experience who will be able to put together our basis of design. So we're already gearing up for this, and because we need to come up with a basis of design for this project to be able to progress it. We're also having to deploy resources concurrently with Siemens for, if you like, a pilot project that's also being conducted in parallel with this. But look, I mean, this month we're kicking off a drilling venture exploration project in Upper Austria, and that's going to be our first well. And we managed to basically pick up a license and within 11 months be able to get on the ground and drill a well. I don't know any jurisdiction on the planet that you can do that right now. The other thing we're also looking at is expanding that, if you like, AGS license footprint. The reason they call them AGS licenses is the licenses are for production, exploration, and for storage. So when we expand our footprint, what we're looking for is not just new exploration targets, but also potentially some depleted reservoirs as well that could be used for hydrogen, but also geothermal opportunities. So it's all very synergistic at the moment.
Thanks, Ian. How has COVID impacted the company's operations in Austria and more broadly Europe?
Look, I look back to what happened to us in 2020, and we basically were producing at our Vienna Basin fields without any interruption to production. And so we have instituted certain procedures to make sure that we double up our staffs just in case someone does get COVID. All our staff are vaccinated, which is great. In terms of our drilling, the local contractor says they see no issues in relation to those operations. So yeah, look, I mean, things are very well organised in Austria, despite their low vaccination rate. Things are going very, very smoothly for us. Now, in our head office, we obviously people have to wear masks, and where people are, rather than spending every day in the office, what we're doing is cycling people through the office. So people are spending, say, 2 days a week in the office rather than 5. But in terms of impact on our operations, we're not impacted today. Nor do we.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Ian. A couple more questions before we finish. You mentioned the MOA with Windkraft Siemensfeld. You obviously have a relationship with Siemens. Are there any other agreements in the works of a similar nature to assist in developing your projects? And how do you continue developing these sorts of corporate relationships?
Yeah, look, I think, I'll answer your last question first. I think people are motivated if you offer up something that is relevant to them. Now, we approached probably 6 wind power generators, and ranging from very big companies to what I'd describe more as investment companies. I guess what was very heartening to me was they all responded. They all wanted to know what we were doing. So in the end, it was actually turned out to be more of a beauty contest than sort of a begging contest by ADX. And the reason we went with Windkraft Siemensfeld was because, first of all, they're a very large player. They supply green energy to about 25,000 households in Austria, and they're increasing their capacity quite significantly in the coming years. But also, what's really important is they're an operator, and what I mean by that is they're not just an investor, because wind farms can be a bit like pine plantations. Some people just go out and raise a bunch of money, they plant the wind farms, they get subsidies for 12 years, and then they pull them out of the ground. So then it just gets down to how efficiently you build them, and the cost of building them, and your cost of capital. Whereas Windkraft, actually, they're the operator. They not only build their own wind farms, they also operate other people's wind farms. So that was really important for us, because obviously we wanted someone who's going to come into the project. So, and I guess the winning side of it was not just their availability of green power, just 7 kilometres from us, but also the fact that they're actually keen to participate in the project, because they can see themselves that hydrogen is going to be, a substantial part of the European economy going forward, and they want to get their feet wet. And the nice thing is that they've wanted to get their feet wet with us. So that's very important. Now, in terms of Siemens, look, the reason they're there is because that, I won't say who they went to, but they were trying to work with another European operator, and they said to us, look, it's taken as long to sign a confidentiality agreement with them as to sign an operating agreement with you guys. So look, one of the few advantages you have of being small is that you can if you decide something's worth doing, you can do it, and you can do it quickly. But obviously the important thing was we also had people on the ground that they knew, and we established a working relationship. But this technology for Siemens is really, really important. I think it's really groundbreaking technology, but the problem is they don't have the skills to drill wells or the ability to get licenses or any of that. So it just illustrates my point that being actually an oil and gas company gives you access to opportunities that the average company can't get. So it's basically who we are, our people on the ground, and I guess the fact that we're starting to do things that people are interested in.
And final question, Ian. Oh, yeah. Sorry to interrupt.
No, I
you
didn't
go.
answer your questions. And in terms of relationships, yeah, there are other relationships that we are pursuing, and they're very important. But obviously, we're in negotiations, and until we get to a point where we've got some kind of agreement, then it's pretty difficult to talk about it.
And final question, Ian, what are the key steps to commercialise this project? You've referenced it a bit in the presentation, but can you just restate that for us before you go?
Yeah, look, to summarise, we need to finalise arrangements with Windcraft Simonsfeld, because that when you look at the project, you can really break it into three areas. You've got upstream, that's the supply of power. So we need to finalise that relationship in terms of securing the availability of that power at an appropriate price. The participation of Windcraft Simonsfeld and their commitment to build an interconnector. Now, all the discussions around that have been really positive. Once we know what we're putting into the project, then the other side is obviously we're taking out of the project. So we're also in discussions with the local gas grid operator, and because it's new for them, they have to take the hydrogen. But obviously, we need to put together agreements where we supply hydrogen into the network, and there's going to be certain protocols for metering, etc. So that's work that's being done in parallel. So once you've got your input and your output sorted, then we'll be able to, finalise our basis of design to ensure that we're choosing the right electrolyser capacity and doing the right, if you like, refurbishment work on our fields to be able to make use of the green power and the markets that we have available to us.
Fantastic. Well, that's all the time we have today. Thank you all for joining me, and I'd also like to thank Ian for presenting and taking the time to answer some questions. As I mentioned before, a recording of the webinar will be on ADX's website and social media platforms later today. Ian, before I let you go, do you have any final comments to leave with us today?
No, not really. Only to say that we are very privileged with our position in the Vienna Basin in relation to hydrogen. The reason I wanted to come out with that letter is because I get asked a lot of questions about hydrogen. I mean, obviously there's some, if you like, some very big visionary things going on with hydrogen when you look at the things that Fortescue is looking to do, etc. But I guess what we have here is a very grassroots project. It's very here and now, and it is that way because of where we are and what we've got. So it's a little bit different to the grand scale and very expensive projects that people are talking about elsewhere. All the ingredients are there, and we're just bringing it all together and getting on with it.
Fantastic. Well, that wraps it up for us here. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you very much, Alex.